Hey, today I'd like to show you the basic process to create a nice greenhouse sitting room floor. So this natural stone, it's a mica, is set on a concrete pad, and we're going to use a couple of more tile types of materials. So for the mortar, a thin set mortar, and a fast setting grout as well. And I had to rework the drain too, set it to the new height to account for the thickness of the mortar and the stone. So the prep was easy, just made sure the concrete was nice and clean, checked the heights, make sure it sloped well. And then I adjusted the drain and started laying out all my pieces. So cutting them to fit really nice, try to go pretty tight so that it's not going to use a ridiculous amount of grout when we get to that point. And basically just laid out about half of it. And that way I can pull up small sections at a time and set them down with the thin set mortar. That way I don't lose track of where all the pieces go. And with this sponge system, I can actually sponge off a section underneath to make sure it's nice and clean and mortar them down one piece at a time. And here's just our couple options for grout color. We went with more of a base tone. So this is a similar tone to what's actually in sort of what I would call the base of the stone. So it's a nice kind of creamy color, a bit of a lighter grout than I typically use for, let's say, like a bluestone material. And it's really going to sort of frame all the stones nicely, but not draw your eye away from the quality of the stone itself. I'm going to share with you some actual setting techniques with a notched trowel and how to adjust for the different thicknesses of stone in a different video. But in this one, I want to at least show you how I typically grout. So it's a pre-mixed bag of grout, obviously to that specific color, which is really nice because you can color match if you ever had to add a section or repair a section, let's say, in the future. So really nice color match. And I'm using the grout float that has sort of a spongy surface as a way to actually get the mortar out of the bucket and into place, but also sort of as a squeegee. So I'm pressing it in, it has a little bit of give to it. So with the sort of the front end, I'm pressing it into the joints and then making sure that they're filled up really nicely and topped up. And then I'm using the edge of the grout float to sort of squeegee the material across the surface and drag it over to an area that I haven't done yet. So it is a very, I would say, messy process to use this kind of grout. And you have to be really careful with a natural stone surface because the grout can really sit in any of those really small little natural stone pockets on the actual surface texture itself. So you have to be confident in the fact that you can finish a section before this fast setting grout starts to go off. And you need to make sure that you are sponging it off at the right time. So that's really the challenge. We always pre-wet the stone, but if you're noticing that the grout and the stone is starting to dry as you're grouting, you might want to just hit it with a sponge quickly to make sure it's not going to start to set on that stone surface. And also you don't want to sponge it off too quick, so it's going to drag a lot of the grout out of the joint lines when you sponge it off, if you're sponging it off too quickly. So there's a fine line. You can sort of do a little test sample and see what I'm talking about there. Just making sure that you're not taking on too much and doing too big of a section at a time, I think is really the best way to go. So we sponge it off once using the sort of the sponge grout cleaning system. So it has a tray in the bucket and rollers to get the right amount of moisture content on the sponge. And then we're going to sponge it off a second time, getting rid of all of the excess on the surface and then actually finishing the joints to the right heights. And then we sponge it off a third or even fourth time to really just clean off any of the excess residue and make sure it looks nice and clean. So here's the finished product. Worked nicely around the drain there. And it should make for a nice sitting area, especially with the light exposure here, especially in the fall or even in the spring when it's a little bit cooler outside. This greenhouse is going to have really nice sort of scents from the actual plants on the other half, and it's going to be a couple degrees warmer than outside for most of the year. All right, let me know if you have any questions.